This is your Wednesday daily delivery. I am Michael Rand. We have lots to get to today, starting with the Wild here in just a minute. Lost 5-2 to St. Louis on Tuesday, pushed to the brink in this playoff series, now down 3-2. Missed opportunity, telling the story of this postseason for the Wild, just as it did for the Wolves. Will their fate be any different? We'll dive into that here in a minute. Got to talk a little bit of Twins here. Ran into some better competition, some better pitching, maybe a predictable result on Tuesday with Justin Verlander shutting them down. Almost having a no-hitter, by the way. Lynx falling to 0-3 was not a good night for Minnesota sports. A lot of teams lost and didn't look good doing it. Lynx fall to 0-3, lose to Indiana, a rebuilding team in every sense of the word. If you can't win that one, you are in trouble. And David La Vaque, high school sports writer for the Star Tribune, will join me here in a little while as well to talk about high school recruiting, to talk about high school boys volleyball almost getting into the mix as the next varsity sport, but falling one vote short. First, though, what did I miss? Have to focus on the Wild. That is the time of year we're in. Playoffs. Wild is up 2-1 late in the second period at home. Game 5, a lot of momentum, a lot of things going their way against St. Louis. A little bit of a fluky goal towards the end of the period totally changes momentum. And then Vladimir Tarasenko, the hat trick in the third period. A lot not to like about those goals. The Wild kind of crumbled in the third period. I've got 3 main points to make about that, and then some big picture stuff. Number 1, Kirill Kaprizov cannot do this alone. Kaprizov had both Wild goals on Tuesday, including a ridiculous second one where he kind of maneuvered the puck to himself and fired a shot in kind of just a very tight space shot, upper short side. It was just a perfect, beautifully placed shot. He has absolutely shown up and beyond that in these playoffs. 7 goals now for the Wild in the postseason. But folks, he can't do this by himself. And, it hasn't been just him. I think Joel Eriksson Ek has had a nice playoff series. I think Kaprizov's line mates have been fine, maybe getting some points by being near him, but also by playing reasonably well. Matt Zuccarello and Ryan Hartman. But every other line has come up small, at least in the scoring department, in this postseason. The Wild has 15 playoff goals right now. Kaprizov has 7 of them. Eriksson Ek has 3. Nobody else with more than 1. And you've got nothing from Kevin Fiala on the goal standpoint. No goals, 3 assists in 5 games, a -4 in those 5-on-5 situations. He's fired 12 shots, which is okay, but none of them have gone in. Kaprizov, by the way, has taken 25 shots. He's been all over the ice. Everything you want a star player to be, Kaprizov has been in these playoffs. It's for him to have 7 goals in 5 games and for them to trail now in this series. It's a failure. You're failing your best player. He's absolutely been carrying you, trying to carry you through these playoffs, and nobody else is coming along for the ride. It's like, I don't know exactly how to describe it other than that, but it feels like he is playing a different game with a different sense of urgency than the rest of his teammates. Speaking of a lack of urgency, the go-ahead goal for St. Louis early in the third period Tuesday night was just a classic case of tentativeness, of poor play. And I don't know who exactly to blame, but both Wild defensemen kind of watched. It was like a harmless-looking dump in, essentially. I mean, yeah, St. Louis got the puck deep, but it was the kind of play where it didn't look like there should have been a whole lot of pressure on the puck. Both Wild defensemen could have gone and played the puck, but both let the St. Louis skater come through and play the puck. Jacob Middleton, who's been very good in this series by and large, by the way. He is a +6 in this series in 5 games. I don't want to pick on him necessarily, but he lets that puck get played by the St. Louis player, centers to Tarasenko. Tarasenko fires one past Marc-Andre Fleury for the 3-2 lead. Fleury, by the way, could have played that puck. They made that point on the ESPN broadcast that maybe he could have helped his teammates a little bit if he had gone and played that puck around. But maybe he's thinking, okay, we've got 2 guys here. One of them should be able to go get it and play it, and I don't think I need to be the one that goes and plays it. So that happened, and all of a sudden it's 3-2, and then it gets to be 4-2 really fast right after that, and then of course St. Louis adds an empty netter later. So that was disappointing to me. That whole sequence just felt like a team that was tight, that was feeling, a little bit of the pressure of, 2-2 in the third period, 2-2 in the series. You're at home. ESPN flashed a graphic too during that game, which wasn't surprising to me at all. Winner of Game 5 when the series is tied 2-2 goes on to win the series almost 80% of the time. It's just so hard to recover from that, because then of course it's just simple math. You've got to win 2 when the other team only has to win 1, and it feels like the challenge becomes even more daunting when you are the home team and you lose that Game 5, because then you got to immediately go to that other team's building in Game 6. It's rocking. They're flying around trying to win that game, trying to finish things off and not go back to your home ice for Game 7. So that sequence right there was very disappointing to me. Felt like they could have done more with that. And I guess the other point I need to make on this before we hear from Wild head coach Dean Evason and hear from Wild beat writer Sarah McClellan is that I just felt like there was the energy in the building. I just feel like there's this thing that happens in Minnesota sports where we are scarred by past failures, where we are expecting the worst. And as soon as that third period started, it seemed like people were excited. But as soon as that first goal went in, even if it was just 3-2, even if the Wild has been this tremendous comeback team all season, everybody at that point was expecting the worst, was resigned to some sort of fate. And I'm not blaming the fans for this loss. I'm just saying there is an energy in this market that is inescapable. When things start to go wrong, the energy just gets so bad. I felt it in Game 3 of that Timberwolves playoff loss, being at Target Center, when they blew that 25, 26-point lead. The energy at the end, by the middle of the fourth quarter was just awful. Everybody was expecting them to lose. And, maybe that expectation comes from feeling the energy of the team. I don't know what it is, but there is this damage to our collective psyche, and I don't know how you break out of that cycle. Maybe the only way to break out of the cycle is to finally win a couple of these games. So where does the Wild go from here? Can they push any magic buttons? Well, Cam Talbot ended the regular season without a loss in 16 consecutive regulation starts, 13-0-3 in his last 16 regulation starts. You know what they usually call someone who wins his last, or who doesn't lose in 16 straight starts? They call him a Stanley Cup champion. Cam Talbot's not played in this series. Marc-Andre Fleury has been good. He's been bad. I think the sum total is he's been average in this series. Would not stun me to see a switch just for the sake sometimes of switching, changing the energy, changing the chemistry for Game 6. I know Dean Evason has just rode with Marc-Andre Fleury. He's got that playoff pedigree, so I guess it wouldn't surprise me too to see him stick with Fleury. But if it was me, I would be tempted at this point. You saw what it did for the Blues in this series. They made a switch from Husso to Binnington after Game 3, and they've won those last 2 games. It wasn't all Binnington, of course, but I think he brought a different edge to the crease, and maybe Cam Talbot, very rested, very ready, could steal them Game 6, change the energy a little bit. So that is the one button Dean Evason has to push, and I wonder if he will do that. That said, I just think he's, post game, he's counting on the resilience of this team to carry them through. Let's hear from him now.
We've seen our group respond, and we're expecting our group to respond. And yeah, it's a must-win. It's desperation. We're going to play our best game. All the cliches that you want to throw out there. It's one hockey game at a time, and we'll compete our butts off and see where we sit at the end of the night.
Can they do it? I don't know. This has been a resilient team all year. I will grant them that. But the way things finished in Game 5, they're going to have a lot to overcome. I want to play a voicemail now, too, from Sarah McClellan, our Wild beat writer, checked in late after the game with these thoughts.
Kirill Kaprizov had his best showing of the playoffs in Game 5, but the performance still wasn't enough for the Wild to prevail against the Blues, who now have a chance to close out this best-of-7 series on home ice on Thursday after their 5-2 win on Tuesday at Xcel Energy Center. How did the Wild get here? 4 straight goals by St. Louis flipped its 1-goal deficit into a runaway victory. After a tying goal late in the second period by Brandon Saad, Vladimir Tarasenko scored twice in 1 minute and 28 seconds early in the third before completing a hat trick into an empty net. On the game-winning goal, Tarasenko was left all alone in front to capitalize, with Wild coach Dean Evason calling the team's mistakes uncharacteristic. This surge by the Blues came after an impressive 2-goal effort in the first period by Kaprizov to give the Wild a 2-1 lead. He scored twice on the power play less than 4 minutes apart, and his 7 goals lead the Stanley Cup playoffs and are the most in Wild history for a single series. But despite Kaprizov's tear, the Wild season is 1 loss away from being over. Game 6 will determine if the Wild is the only team to travel back to Minnesota or if the Blues will also have to make that trip for Game 7.
Take a playcation to Mystic Lake for 24/7 gaming, fun restaurants and bars, and luxurious hotel rooms. And join Club M to bask in the rewards. Follow the lights to Mystic Lake, where every day is play day.
Happy to have David La Vaque on Daily Delivery today. David does a great job covering high school sports with the Star Tribune. He and I go way back. I was his editor back in the day, and it feels like a different life, but prep sports have been a big part of what we do at the Star Tribune for a long time, and things only evolving and changing. And David had a good story in Tuesday's paper that I wanted to ask him a little bit more about. Dave, how you doing?
Doing well, thanks. Nice to be working more directly with you again.
Yes. And maybe I'll see you in the office soon. We're starting to creep back in there a little bit more. But you had a story on high school recruiting, and feels like it was mostly the football realm and just kind of this new tool that the Minnesota Football Coaches Association is kind of latching onto, where, athletes have kind of a more comprehensive way of, getting their, not just their skills and their highlights, but some, maybe a little bit of their personality and some of their, doing drills, things like that. I think it's called Signing Day Sports. As you've kind of thought about the evolution of recruiting, maybe we can kind of start there. It's always been such a big part of what we do, a big part of the high school interest level, getting these high school kids going to college, but feels like it's getting more sophisticated by the day.
You're right. We always had huddle. And one of the first things I asked the folks at Signing Day Sports is, well, I thought we already had a platform for putting up videos and game highlights. And they said, we do, but this takes that concept a step further, and it allows to record your measurable attributes. So whether that's your 40-yard dash or your vertical jump, it takes the ambiguity out of, well, this kid says he posted he ran a 4.3. How verifiable is that? Well, now there's video to allow for that. Same thing with vertical jump. It allows for kids to answer questions and give you a sense of their personality, their priorities, why they play football, who they are as young men. So it's got a lot going for it. And it embraces the technology. For example, we had a combine here in Minnesota for the third year, put on by the Minnesota Football Coaches Association and Training House. And the kids were encouraged to just bring their phones and stand in a line to do the 40-yard dash, for example, and you hand your phone to the kid behind you. He records it, and then you can upload it. It's really that it's that kind of grassroots as far as putting the information out. You don't have to hire a video crew to follow you around. So it seems like it offers a lot that is good for the kids' exposure, but also gives the college recruiters peace of mind that the information is legitimate.
Is this, from a user standpoint, is this designed more for the athlete that might not otherwise ordinarily get seen, or that doesn't get to all the camps, maybe is in a, more remote area, things like that? Or is it more of a, just anybody who is, wants to get recruited is going to use this tool?
I asked Chad Greenway was one of the hooks for this story. The other being that Signing Day Sports partnered with the Minnesota Football Coaches Association. Chad Greenway, the great Vikings linebacker, he came on as an ambassador, and he was that kind of a guy coming out of a small school in southeastern South Dakota. He got one college offer, and it was from the University of Iowa, which he ultimately signed with, and it was somebody knew somebody that knew Kirk Ferentz, the Iowa coach. So it was kind of a catching lightning in a bottle with him. And so it's near and dear to his heart that they find a way to get exposure. And I think he talked about it in the story. You might be a late bloomer. You might play for a school that's not terribly successful. You might play for a school that's in the middle of nowhere. This is a good vehicle to get yourself out there. He figures it's going to serve kids with Division II and III aspirations a little better, because not only are the kids trying to make a name for themselves, those colleges don't have the recruiting staff and budgets that the Blue Bloods do. But can it help a Division I athlete? Yes, it can. It can expose them to more Division I options potentially. So it does cater to all levels of the high school athlete, the high school football player looking to find a way to make a dent in the college scene.
What do, I'm sure there's, coaches that have been around for a long time. Have they just kind of had to roll with the punches with this and just kind of adapt to the new world, or do some of them resist some of this and say, if you're good enough, they'll come find you. Don't waste your time worrying about all of the, the measurables and things like that.
There is some resistance. One of the things Greenway talked about, he said he called it varying levels of coaches' interest in helping with the recruiting process for their players. And so there are coaches that need to come on board. I think if you're talking about old school coaches, it doesn't get much older school than Ron Stolsky, who was formerly the coach at Brainerd for 48 years. He's still the head of the Coaches Association, and he's speaking about this, talking about, hey, he likes the fact that it's an innovative resource. He likes the fact that it'll maximize players' exposure to colleges and universities and provide a clear path. So the old school coach is on board. And I think as more and more new school coaches take jobs, hopefully they'll say, hey, it's worth it to promote my best kid or kids, because it reflects well on the young men, and it reflects well on me as a coach, and it reflects well on the health of our program. Because you have to sell your program to kids nowadays to make sure they come to your high school instead of 2 towns over. So I think it really it does a nice job of getting coaches fired up about, okay, hey, this is one place we can put this information, and it's going to get seen by all these different schools. And so I hopefully it'll get whoever is kind of lingering out there in the Stone Age to come aboard and be part of this.
Who has time to look at all this stuff, though? I mean, I'm just thinking about the schools. There's this you know what I'm thinking? I just feel like, I feel like the same thing happens even in a content world where there's so much out there to consume. When you're exponentially increasing the access you have to all these different players, it's got to be a little bit overwhelming, I would imagine, for the coaches who are trying to evaluate all this.
Yeah, it is. And one thing Signing Day Sports offers is you can very quickly shorten the amount of people you're looking at. You can screen them out. You can say, all right, I want just wide receivers. And so maybe the overall list of 150 comes down to, okay, there's only 25 wide receivers that have their information up. Or, I want kids that run a certain speed range. And okay, all right, well, we can narrow it down to those kids. So they have a way to make the searching process much more easy and easier to navigate and more quickly pair their program with what these players do best.
Final thing on that story, then I want to jump into a couple other things with you as well, David. This is not a free service, of course. Nothing really these days is. I believe the annual cost to the user was $250, which, big picture, I suppose is relatively affordable when you're talking about going to camps and you're talking about activity fees, you're talking about equipment, everything like that. That said, it just feels like there is a certain arms race that we've written about before, and you've written about even since I was the sports editor there the high school editor about a decade ago. As you think about that, how do you kind of think about this fitting into that landscape, and like just one more thing that people are on the hook for paying for if they want to have maximize their potential to move on and be a college athlete?
You're right. It is one more thing. You're also right that if you go out to the $250 annually, if you take what it costs to, let's say you're living in Minnesota, let's say these camps are even other parts of the Midwest. Now tell me how much gasoline and lodging and food and everything else is going to cost. Maybe it's not as ridiculous as it might seem, or as exorbitant as it might seem. The other thing that Signing Day Sports is trying to do, they're trying to, certainly they want the individual players to sign up, but they're also looking to see if they could sell some sort of prorated package to a school. And then if you're under that particular school's umbrella, now you can reap the benefits of that. And maybe it doesn't cost you much at all out of pocket because the school's picking up the tab or the booster club is picking up the tab. So there are ways to get around the price points if that's necessary. And of course, kids can still get a basic free subscription and still get their profiles to have coaches be able to go out there and at least see who they are and what they think they can offer.
Accompanying this story was a look at some of the more highly recruited linemen in Minnesota football right now. You see Jackson Howard from Cooper at the top of that list. He's a combo defensive end, tight end. Sounds like he's very highly recruited, a national recruit, son of Willie Howard, who's currently his high school coach, and he's been part of the Minnesota high school football scene for a while. Maybe you can just kind of touch on this list and how good these linemen are that are making this top 5 cut right now.
I had to chuckle because the last time I saw Jackson Howard, he was playing quarterback as an emergency in the Prep Bowl semifinals because their guy had gone down hurt. And I had never seen Jackson Howard. And I'm thinking, all right, he's a defensive end, tight end. He's a big guy. Maybe he has a little baby fat on him. And then I saw him taking snaps and warming up. And I'm like, oh, my God, that's just a really big put together athlete. So he definitely looks the part. And so, yeah, he's a special athlete and can do a lot of things. And he's clearly a leader for his team. And God, what is it? 60 Division I offers he's got. That's crazy. Including one from the Gophers for those that are concerned about such things. And the rest of your question, I'm sorry, Mike. What was it?
Just the rest of the list. We got Jerome Williams from Osseo, who's an interior offensive lineman heading to the Gophers. You got another defensive lineman from Moorhead. It seems like it's a pretty good crop of linemen on either side of the ball, and maybe that's not too surprising. I think Minnesota does a pretty good job of cranking out, offensive and defensive linemen. It does look like a particularly good group that are getting recruited right now.
Yeah, you're right. They all have credentials as players. They all have a list of offers that would make you envious. I like the fact that we've got a kid from Moorhead and a kid from Casson-Manorville, because you've got two situations there where you're outstate Minnesota, and in case of Casson-Manorville, a couple of small towns to boot. So that's exciting. And then a couple guys from Prior Lake, which is fun to see. So, then we just came off a year where you had a really good crop of offensive linemen from Shakopee, Lakeville North, and Eden Prairie have always had their share. So it's fun to see that not only are these guys big and strong, but gosh, they're getting so athletic. As we mentioned at the top of this part of the conversation, Jackson Howard was emergency quarterback. So these are really, really special athletes that happen to be linemen, but could probably do a lot more for teams depending on what their needs are. So they're that versatile.
Shifting gears a little bit. Final thing I wanted to bring up, because I saw our colleague Jim Paulson reporting on this on Tuesday. Boys volleyball very close, one vote away from becoming the next sanctioned high school varsity sport, but misses by one vote. Maybe you can kind of just, I know you weren't the primary reporter on this, but I'm sure you've, been keeping up with this story. Maybe you can kind of share what was at stake? How did boys volleyball at least rise to where it is right now, where it seems like at some point soon, when you get that close, you would imagine the votes will be there at some point once they kind of get this all sorted out.
Yeah, Jim really did a nice job of breaking down what was at stake in an article that ran, I guess that was last week on Friday. And he talked about, so why are we here with volleyball? And he said, one of the big reasons, talking about why you'd want to add it is opportunity, because there's a survey that was conducted by the Minnesota Boys High School Volleyball League. And 90% of the boys that are already playing club volleyball were not intending to play another spring sport. Wow. So you say, well, I don't want this sport taken away from my kids, because that happened. I know there are concerns in lacrosse when that came in, and what are they going to take from track and field? They're going to take from baseball. So volleyball seems to be kind of in a little vacuum of its own as far as player interest. So that's one thing that's exciting. The demand is growing. There's 1,400 boys that are playing in this 54-team Minnesota Boys High School Volleyball League this spring. So that's exciting. And then you've got, and I thought this was maybe the key statistic of them all. 54% of the players identify as a person of color, and a lot of that is Asian Americans. And so this is not just adding a sport for boys; it's adding a sport that is going to bring more faces and backgrounds to the mix that get at that larger goal of diversifying the sports and the offerings. And volleyball really caters to that. So I think that's exciting too.
Hopefully that can get passed, because I like all of those reasons. That sounds like a good reason to, a lot of those things, a good reason to add that eventually. So we'll see if that passes in the future. David, great stuff. Good catching up with you. Let's do this again soon. All right. Enjoy some summertime too pretty soon. I know the prep season is a grind. Spring isn't usually as bad as the fall and winter. You get outside, get to watch some outdoor sports, but pretty soon I'm sure you'll be happy to catch your breath a little bit more, right?
Indeed I will.
Good stuff from David La Vaque. Love talking high school sports. Interesting, direction recruiting has gone. Like Dave and I talked about, I was the high school sports editor at the Star Tribune from about 2007 to 2011. So, quite a while ago. Recruiting was obviously a big deal then, but technology has only accelerated and gotten, more prevalent since then. What you can do, how you can get your information out there is only getting more advanced. So interesting to hear what players are doing these days, what teams are doing, and all of that. Let's finish up with a couple of thoughts on a couple other unfortunate outcomes on Tuesday night. Twins lose to the Astros 5-0. Justin Verlander against Joe Ryan, the two pitchers who have pitched best. Joe Ryan, certainly the pitcher that's pitched best for the Twins this season, most consistently at least. He was wild. He was ineffective. 4 innings, 4 hits, 5 walks, could not command the strike zone. Justin Verlander had no problem commanding the strike zone. 8 innings, 1 hit, no runs, 2 walks, 5 strikeouts. Only took him 89 pitches to dispatch the Twins. It was a beautiful night for a bad game. And again, Houston now 19-11. Both teams came in 18-11, but the Twins definitely had their doubters, right? Definitely had their people who were saying, yeah, you've done this against not so great competition, and they didn't really do much to quell those concerns in this game. And again, in this game, no Byron Buxton, no Carlos Correa. Correa going on the injured list before the game, trying to get that finger right after getting hit last week. Buxton still trying to get right completely after, another minor nagging injury that's keeping him out of the lineup. So it was, you just look up and down the Twins lineup, a lot of replacement players in there. Jose Miranda was in there. Royce Lewis was in there. Kirilloff back in there, but he's been kind of rusty. Celestino's in there. So, those guys against Justin Verlander, not necessarily a fair fight, and it showed on Tuesday night. Let's finish with the cooler. The Lynx fall to 0-3, lost to Indiana, which has not been a good team for a very long time. And that was, I kind of went into that game thinking, okay, if the Lynx need to get right. They've lost their first 2 games, but both of them were against pretty good opponents. I mean, they jump out to a 21-12 lead after the first quarter. You're like, okay, they are trying to restore order here. End up losing 82-76, get outscored 36-18 in that second quarter of the game. Angel McCautry only plays 7 minutes in this game. That is not going well. She got benched. Ariel Powers got benched as well. Not a happy kind of game for anybody involved in this one. Cheryl Reeve, no one's entitled to a starting job, she said after the game. We're going to spend our time tweaking and working and finding the right combination. It's important to remember, of course, that they started 0-4 last season before finishing 22-10. They should get better when Kayla McBride arrives. But, Sylvia Fowles in her, last season, 26 points, 14 rebounds on 12 of 17 shooting. Did not get much help in this game. McCautry was a -14 in just 7 minutes of action. So they got to figure this out. They got to get this right. They got to figure out what they're doing. Crystal Dangerfield, by the way, cut by the Lynx, cut by Reeve, is now on Indiana, played 21 minutes, had 10 points and 6 assists, and was a +19 in the game. Might she have helped in this game? You have to wonder. Going to talk more Lynx on Thursday's show, by the way, with Lynx beat writer Kent Youngblood of the Star Tribune. That will do it for me today. Hope you enjoyed today's show. A lot of different topics covered here. Like I said, Lynx topic will be heavily discussed on Thursday's show. And on Friday, hoping to bring you an interview with Malika Andrews of ESPN. I hope that will play out and come through. Supposed to talk to her sometime in the next couple of days, so that could be a fun Friday show as well. Enjoy the rest of your day. We'll be back at it again on Thursday.